My name is Michael Gordon-White, and welcome to Candid Street. In this video, I'm going to talk all about the camera I use and how I set it up for shooting street photography. All of this information can be found in my new book, People Photography, Life, and the Street, in the first chapter called Camera Choice and Gear Setup. My book is now available for immediate download at the Amazon Kindle store, and in Amazon's Look Inside feature, you can read the first 8 chapters for free, including the one that I'm going to cover in this video. Let's get started. The camera I use while shooting street photography is a Canon 5 DSR. It is a full-frame digital SLR with a massive 50.6 megapixel sensor. This camera captures amazing fine detail, has incredible bit depth, which allows for aggressive edits when needed, and with the 50.6 megapixel sensor, it also allows for plenty of room to crop the files, which is important to the way I shoot street photography, as you will learn in future videos and if you read my book. But the best part of this camera, which is most important to me with the way that I shoot street, is the 61-point autofocus module, which is similar to the one used in the pro-level Canon 1DX camera. This focus system is absolutely amazing at how accurate it can perform. But for this to happen, I had to do lots of tests and make adjustments, as well as had some discoveries to be able to fully take advantage of this system. I know this camera inside and out and have used it so much that I fully trust it to get the shot. So much so that I can go a full day of shooting and never have to look at the back of the camera to see if I've actually captured an image. This is also very important to the way that I shoot street. Okay, enough about that. Let's get into the menu to see how I have it set up. Okay, let's get into the menu. Let's turn this guy on. So I'll just go through the menu from left to right as I see anything that is of interest. So image quality is always raw. Image review is off. I never have that on. I never once look at the back of the camera throughout the day as I'm out shooting street. I don't want to waste time reviewing any images and have the chance of missing a shot. So I always have that off, and I'm also have it off just to reserve battery power. Beep is disabled. I don't need anybody hearing my focus beeping, and I don't want to hear it. Auto white balance, I don't worry about that too much because and if there's any issue between shots taken close together, or deal with that in Photoshop. Color space is Adobe RGB. So let's get into the autofocus. So as I explained in the book, this camera has what Canon calls cases. Case 1, I've used it, but it's basic, doesn't do what I need. In fact, this took quite a bit of time for me to go through these to come up with what I found is the best setting, and that is case 6, for subjects that change speed and move erratically. Now, for the parameters, the tracking, sensitivity, accelerate, decelerate tracking, autofocus, point auto switching, all of those, as you can see, are set to the far right. But for this one, I have it, tracking sensitivity, I have it set to responsive. This is also set again to 2, also set to 2, as you can see. So what does that mean? Takes effect with 61-point auto selection, autofocus zone, autofocus, and autofocus point expansion. Keeps tracking and focusing on subjects even if their speed changes suddenly. I'll just read this. Also keeps focusing on erratic moving subjects by automatically switching to other autofocus points to facilitate autofocus. If autofocus cannot keep up with speed changes, it may help to set accelerate, decelerate tracking to 2+, which is what I have. For rapid autofocus point switching, I have that set to 2 as well, as explained, and they have subject examples as rhythmic gymnastics, which is perfect for me because I'm out on the street, I'm moving, my subjects are moving, and that's when autofocus becomes critical for a successful in-focus shot. When everybody's standing still, I'm standing still, my subject's standing still, focus isn't an issue, it's just focuses on the nearest subject. But when things start to move, I've found case 6 is absolutely critical. Auto servo, first image priority and second image priority. I always have it set on AI servo. right here. I have that set up majority of the time, so I'm half pressing and it's continuously setting up autofocus. So the AI servo first image priority, I have that set on focus. So what that means is that when you half press and you press fully to obviously release the shutter and capture your image, I have the priority set to focus. So what it will do is it will delay ever so slightly, and so the shot will be in focus. I could have that set to release priority, so it would release super fast, but it would at risk of having it out of focus. I don't want that, so I have it set to focus. And the second image, exact same thing, I have it set for focus priority. So that's pretty much it for that. Another thing that's really important about this camera that I like is that when I have it shoot, I shoot quote unquote from the hip. And so I look down at my computer and there's that menu on the top of the camera, which is very important for me to check how the camera's performing. Okay, so let's get into what Canon calls the custom shooting modes. So what that is on the dial on the left here. I have C1, C2, and C3. So for C3, this is what I use probably about 90% of the time, and I have the autofocus point selection set on the 61 point autofocus. Again, this is for C3 and f2.0 AI servo focus. And so that's, again, the majority of the time while I'm out shooting street. This camera, as most cameras do by default, focuses on the nearest subject to the lens. So your half press, whatever's closest to the lens, it typically captures or grabs focus. But if your subject that you want to capture is behind something, let's say a street light pole, if you half press, the camera's going to automatically focus on the nearest thing, which will be the pole, instead of the person that you want to take a picture of, and that's obviously a problem. So what I do is I have, if I find myself in that situation where I want to capture somebody that's further off and there's something in front, to prevent the camera from focusing on the nearest thing, I very quickly reach down, switch to C2. How I have it set up here, as you can see in the back, is the expanded autofocus area. As you can see, I can move this manually, and so the highlighted area is what the focus will capture. So what happens here is that your center section is where it will capture focus. So what that means is if the nearest subject is off to the right or left of that, it'll ignore that and it'll focus past that to the subject that I intend to shoot. Now, obviously, people's faces are the highest point on a person's body, so I have this set to the highest point. So all I have to do is I'm out shooting, I'm on C3, and all of a sudden I see somebody that I want to take a picture of that's beyond something that's close to the camera. I just switch to C2, and I'm automatically focusing past the nearest object to the subject that I want to focus on. Half press and it will lock. All I have to do is make sure that the lens, the line of the lens, is focused in the direction of the subject that I want to capture. Half press and it will focus on that person. So with this setting, again, I am AI servo focus. So again, half press, it will search for focus. But the only difference here is that I have it set at 2.8 for the aperture. So to give myself a little bit more room of actually capturing somebody completely in focus at f2.0, maybe a little bit too narrow. So the third option is C1. And with this one, I basically have the camera back on f2.0, but now as you can see, I'm set on one shot focus. So half press, it's not going to search, it's going to focus on the subject. At full press, capture the image. So this is what I call the must capture the image at all cost mode. So again, if I see something that I cannot take a chance at missing, I will quickly switch to C1 and hold the camera up to my eye and take a shot as normal. As you can see, the focus is set on the center focus point, 1 point. So I basically, as normal shooting, I would just hold it up to my face, look through the viewfinder, half press on the subject's face and fully press to capture the image. I would do this as fast as I can, and then I put the camera back down and shoot from the hip, quote unquote, and I immediately switch back to C3. Okay, so that pretty much covers how I set it up for C3, C2, and C1. So it basically means that I have 3 cameras in one, but again, the majority of the time I have it on C3, aperture 2.0, AI servo with 61-point autofocus. That's 90% of the time I shoot. Again, I see somebody that is beyond the nearest thing in frame, like I say, a distracting pole, and I want to focus beyond that. I immediately shoot or switch to C2, half press, point the lens at the subject and capture them. And the small occasion that I see something that I absolutely have to capture and I don't want to rely on the autofocus, I switch to C1, half press, one shot, capture the image. And then again, switch back to 3 and off I go on the majority of the way I shoot. Okay, so that pretty much covers the custom shooting modes. So let's move on. Okay, so let's get into Photoshop here, and I'll bring up some images so that I can further explain the custom shooting modes and why it's so critical to the way I shoot street. So this is a typical situation that I'll find myself in while out on the street. There's a subject standing alone. Again, I have it on C3 with the 61-point autofocus. I have it in AI servo and f2.0. I see a subject I want to take a picture of. I half press. It focuses on the nearest thing to the lens, which is the person, obviously. And in this example, because of the high contrast, it was actually pretty straightforward to capture this because, again, it's quite black and then white to the side of her. And half press, grab focus, take your shot. Majority of the time, that is what I'll find myself in, and I will be able to get a picture of an individual out on the street. Now, as I explained, though, is that with this example, as you can see, the subject is this young girl who is further beyond these people on the left and right. Obviously, her mom's on the left. So as you can see, I managed to capture focus of her, but she's beyond the distance of the people on the side. So normally, the camera would automatically focus on the nearest thing to the lens, and she would be out of focus, and it would be a missed shot. This happened to be a complete accident. I didn't plan this. This was pure luck that this happened. And this was actually when I was using my Canon 5D Mark II. And again, this was pure luck. But when I reviewed this image, this brought to mind, hey, I got to figure out how to do this with intent, like be in control of shooting this. So that's where I came up with C2, where I have, as I explained earlier, the focus cluster in the center of the viewfinder so that I can automatically point the lens at the person I want to take a picture of, and it focuses past the 2 people on the left and right, which are nearest to the lens. So I basically hacked the system. So again, this was pure luck that I discovered this, but that's part of photography. That's how we learn, is we make mistakes. This was actually a mistake. Obviously, it wasn't a mistake because I captured what I wanted to capture, but it was pure luck that I actually did it. But because of this image, it dawned on me, hey, I got to figure out a way to do this. But when I ended up getting the 5DSR, I looked into it further and discovered that this is how I can have it set up. So now, as I explained before, let me go full screen here. I was quite close to this person when I took this shot, and what was in focus is this part of her clothing, and it was nearest to the lens, obviously, and that's what, because of the contrast, that's what grabbed focus. Now, I was using C3, and this was the multi 61-point autofocus. Now, this shot, again, just shows how the camera focuses on the nearest subject. Now, I could think that this was a failed image, but because her face is out of focus, and that is typically what I want in critical focus, is the person's face. But because of the color, I still like this image, and I don't think it was a fail. But again, I just want to demonstrate that the nearest thing to the lens is typically what grabs focus. So here again is an example. I'm out of this on the street, and this person was walking across the intersection to the right of this pole, and I was tracking her with the lens. But what happened here is that, again, the nearest thing to the subject is this pole, and that's what captured or grabbed critical focus, and she's out of focus. But again, I don't consider that a failed image. Adds a little bit of character to it. The timing of it, her stride, everything about that image I like, even though technically it's a fail because I focused on this by mistake instead of her. This was, I wasn't actually on C2 for this image. I was on C3 with the 61-point autofocus. So again, I'm just demonstrating that it doesn't have to, the subject doesn't have to be perfectly in focus for it to be a successful shot. So again, here is an example. The subject that I wanted to capture was beyond the nearest thing to the lens. So this was shot using C2. I aimed the lens at this person. It focused past the person that was standing closest to the lens, and successful shot. This actually wasn't too difficult to capture focus because of the high contrast between the contour of her face and the blue garment. But again, that's an example that I wanted to focus on this subject. I immediately switched to C2, aimed the lens at her, and I was able to get this successful shot. Again, here is a typical situation. A couple people are walking towards me while I'm standing on the street. And another example of the lens will focus on the nearest subject to it, and that would be the person on the right. And with f2.0, you can tell shallow depth of field, and she's out of focus. So again, an example of typical focus characteristics where it will focus on the nearest subject. And with this one, I immediately switched to C2 because I wanted to capture her. I wanted to focus past this individual and this individual on the right. So as you can see, she's in critical focus. This person on the left is not. So again, if I were in C3 using the 61-point autofocus, I would have focused right here on this contrast area, and she would have been out of focus and it would have been a missed shot. But because I switched to C2, I was immediately able to focus past these two, point the lens right at her, successful shot. And again, the subject that I wanted to capture in this image was the person beyond the distance of the one in front. Obviously, she's completely out of focus, nearest to the lens. This is a perfect example of C2, capture the image that I want in control with intent. Instead of having the camera choose for you, I switch to C2, focus past this person, capture the shot that I want. Had I been on C3 with the 61 autofocus, obviously I would have focused on her and I would have missed the shot. The last image, which is again my subject, center of the frame. If she was standing on her own, like the first picture I showed, no problem, but she isn't. She's in a crowd of people, and these people to the left and the right are closer to the camera. Again, using C3, 61-point autofocus. As you know by now, I would have missed this shot. I would have focused on this person right here, and she would have been out of focus, and it would have been a failed shot in my mind. So I immediately switched to C2, point the lens towards my subject that I want to capture, half press, fire away. Successful shot. Okay, that's it for the examples. Okay, let's get back into my camera and how I have it set up. The previous section, I explained the C2, C3 modes, and you may be asking, well, why don't you just point the camera at what you want and focus on that? In a normal shooting situation, you're right. I would hold the camera up to my eye and I would look through the viewfinder. I'd half press exactly where I want to shoot and take the shot. But when I'm out shooting street, I am not holding the camera up to my face, as you're going to learn in future videos. And if you read the book, I fully explain why that is. But I'm basically, quote unquote, shooting from the hip. So I'm not looking through the viewfinder as I'm taking these shots. I'm basically shooting blind. Let's very quickly talk about the lens that I use. You may be wondering. Take the cap off, and we have my absolute favorite lens, but this is the 35mm f1.4L Canon lens. This is the first generation, and this is my absolute favorite lens. I would say probably about 95% of every image I've taken while out shooting street is with this lens. Never fails me. Obviously, it is completely covered in tape, as well as the camera, and you'll learn later why I have that set up like that. But as you can see, this camera looks quite plain. While out shooting street, if someone were to take a quick glance at it, the only thing of interest probably would be this glass in the front. Everything else looks pretty basic and cheap. That's the way I want it. I'm going to talk a little bit about the battery and the cards that I use. So when I'm out shooting street, I'm usually out for 9 hours straight. And what I have here is 2 cards, both of them at 64 gig. So I have my compact flash and my SD, and again at 64. So how I have it set up is to start with one, and then once it's full, automatically switch to the other. Now you may think that's risky, that I could be recording a double image, one on one card and one on the other, but I choose not to do that just because it gives me a chance to have more images. I usually come home with about 2,000, 3,000 shots on a typical day out. I have multiple of these cards, so when they run out, I switch them out. But I trust the camera fully, and I've never had an issue where I've had a card fail. So I start with one card. Once it's full, it automatically switches over. With regards to the battery, typical Canon battery, the latest version of it, which is the LPE6N. I have 2 of them, and that's typically all I need. Most of the time, though, if I stay out long enough, the first battery will be depleted. I take a break, I swap it out, usually swap out the cards at that time as well, depending on how full they are, and back to shooting. So the last thing I want to talk about real quickly is the ISO setting and how I manage it. With regards to the ISO, I always start my day at ISO 160, as you can see right here, ISO 160, that's C2, that's C3, that's C2 ISO 160, and C1 ISO 160. So here I am out shooting. Obviously with the lens cap, it's not showing the correct shutter speed, but what I do is I half press. At the scene I want to take a shot, I quickly look down at the top screen here as I'm shooting, and I can immediately see the shutter speed displayed. And as long as it is about 250th of a second, I am good to go. I'm going to capture a good sharp image. Now that's on a typical sunny day. But as the day progresses and the sun starts to go down and the light starts to fail, what will happen is the shutter speed slows down. It's locked on ISO 160. When I'm shooting and the light starts to fail, if I'm half pressing, I can quickly look down, and if I start to see that drop below 150 down to 100 of a second or 60th of a second, I know I'm going to start getting into blurry shots. So all I do is I quickly press the ISO button, and I make 3 turns, 1, 2, 3. And I've just increased my ISO by 1 stop, and what that will do is increase the shutter speed by 1 stop. And it will bring it back up to a comfortable 200, 250 typical shutter speed, which will allow for sharp images. And I just basically keep doing that as the night progresses and the light fails. I basically do that right up until I reach 6400 ISO. That's my limit. Beyond that, I just stop shooting. Basically, if it's so dark and I need to go beyond 6400, that's the end of my day. Again, with this, in artificial lighting downtown, which is typical in a big city, you have lots of artificial light shining on the street, lighting your subjects, and I find ISO 6400 will typically keep the shutter speed at what I need, which is above 200, 250th of a second, and that's how I manage it. And that pretty much covers everything with regards to how I have it set up. Okay, I know that was a lot to take in, and I apologize for that. But everybody basically asked me, how do you get that shot, Mike? Well, at least for the camera settings, now you know. I absolutely love this camera, the 5D SR, and the way I have it set up took a while to figure out, years in fact, but with it set up that way, I find it quite easy for myself in any situation to capture what I need. Now, having said all that, my camera is not perfect. It doesn't have perfectly reliable face detection. It doesn't have a silent shutter or 100% sensor autofocus. But that's okay, because these imperfections will sometimes get, as I said earlier, what I call a happy accident. I believe this camera and the way I have it set up is absolutely critical to the way I shoot street photography and the success that I have capturing a usable shot. Again, as I said earlier, I've had success using my previous camera, the Canon 5D Mark II, but it was nowhere near as good as the 5D SR at getting the shot. And that, my friends, is what this is all about. But if you don't have this camera, don't let that stop you from trying street photography. Use what you have. Now, learn its limitations and work around them. Like I said, my camera isn't perfect. And as you will learn in future videos, or if you read my book, there are all kinds of tricks and techniques I use while out on the street that have nothing to do with the camera to get the shot. So that's it for now. Thanks for watching. If you found this useful, please give it a like. Press the subscribe button and turn on notifications. And we will see you next time on Candid Street. Be safe.